So good morning, everybody. My name's Steve Bates. I'm the CEO of the BIA, and welcome to our Running a Life Science Business in the COVID-19 Pandemic, second in our series on COVID. Last week, we looked at what the sector was doing to support the global effort, and I'll do a bit of an update on that towards the end of this webinar. But we're focusing this one on what it's like for businesses running during this period. And we've had lots of engagement from members. Thank you very much. And there'll be some interaction in this webinar asking you to take polls, because what we really need to do is understand in live time what the issues are for you. And we've been joined on this occasion by Elliott Forrester, the CEO of F-Star, who I hope will be able to give us a CEO's perspective. It may chime with some of your own experiences. And then the excellent BIA team are going to give perspectives on some of the issues that are running again real time. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague Michael Warren, who's going to be the Gary Lineker, the Des Lynam, for those of you who follow football, or the host with the most for this webinar, who will take us through and I'll hopefully provide some commentary in the style, not of Alan Hansen or Ian Wright, but my own inimitable style. So Michael, over to you.
Great, Steve. Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. We had a fantastic turnout for our webinar last week, and we've got a fantastic turnout today. So thank you all for joining us. We're scheduled for 45 minutes as per the event listing, but there's a lot to get through today. We've got bumper content, as Steve said. We've got great contributions coming in from Nikki, from Martin, and most of all from Elliott Forrester. So with apologies, I think there's perhaps a likelihood that we might run over slightly, but we're going to try our best not to go beyond 12 noon. So what are we going to cover today? Well, let's have a look at the agenda. So here we go. Quick run through the latest situation. I'm going to talk to that, and then Steve, I think you're going to comment on where you see things at the moment. Clearly, it's a fast-moving situation, lots going on, so it'd be good to recap on that. Secondly, we're going to look at some of the BIA resources that we've put in place over the last week or so to support our members and the wider sector on the crisis. Then we're going to turn to issues for our sector and what business support is available. And this is where the view from Elliott will come in. And we're also going to turn to colleagues Nikki, who's going to talk through some of the staffing issues and worker status. And Martin's going to cover off views on the business support package, which the government's put in place, and some of the views from our community that we've been taking in terms of the finance support available. Then Steve, you're going to talk us through the sector response to the crisis to date and kind of recap on where we've got to in terms of our task forces that we've been pulling together, which will be good to hear. And then to finish off, we're going to just recap on what you as businesses and members of the community can do to get involved. I'm going to run through some of the contact points which are available and just recap on what our asks are of you. And then it's down here as item 6 on the agenda, but questions and comments really something we're keen to take as we go through. So if you have any comments or questions that you're interested in getting discussed on today's webinar, please fire them in as we go. I'm going to keep check on that in the box on my screen, and I'll read them out as they throw in good kind of like radio show host format, if I can manage it and multitask. We'll see how that goes. We had some great questions last week, so do please tell us what you're thinking and what you're querying at the moment. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, good. If that sounds okay, I'm going to move us on to the latest news. So this comes in 3 parts really. Firstly, just kind of talk through the journey. It feels like, as Steve said in his quote from last week, you know, the days seem to be moving very, very quickly at the moment. So over the last 7 days, we've moved quickly through a phase when the UK really accelerated its move to control transmissions. So we saw the announcement and the moves to close schools. Many of us, of course, will be already dealing with that, and I'd be interested to know what your experience has been of that as it's taken shape. The government passed through the new coronavirus bill, which gave them more powers to manage the crisis and specifically take control of issues. And then, of course, there was the full lockdown announced by Boris Johnson in his TV address, which really quite unprecedented. and a big step forward for all of us. So that was kind of the journey we went on. But then, as I just wait for my slide to change, then we saw a lot of criticism flying in, some concerns mounting over pressures on the NHS, didn't we? So views from the front line, doctors warning about potentially being overwhelmed. Matt Hancock, our Secretary of State, admitting that there were certainly challenges about getting equipment to the front line. There was the view on whether we're going to have enough of ventilators, and certainly the plans to ramp up production were being queried. And as a response to a lot of that, you know, the government was talking about bringing in retired frontline care workers as well. So it's felt fast moving over the course of the week. But what we've seen, I think, over the last couple of days is perhaps the government response gearing up. Steve, interested in your views on this. So tackling certainly the capacity issue, as we've seen kind of moves to bring the private sector, healthcare sector into play, production on ventilators being given the green light, contract with Dyson being announced over the last 24 hours. There's the volunteer scheme, which would seem to have been a fantastic success in its first few hours, up to 500,000, I think, volunteers now, isn't it? Contingency plans for the Excel Centre, for London as a response to the regional pressures. And then this announcement, which came out via the Select Committee yesterday on antibody testing. But Steve, I'm going to hand to you just to give your view of how you feel like the week's gone.
So, said last week, there are weekends where decades happen, and this is the week we've seen the decade happen. You know, we're in a fundamentally different business environment, social environment, political environment to where we were last week. And I don't think I can overstate how much, pretty much, all of the rules of everything that we've known, certainly for a period of time, are fundamentally changed. So if you're discombobulated by the changes, whether they be at home, whether they be a business, don't worry. Everybody is. This is not normal. Everybody knows this, and it couldn't be anything other than extremely abnormal. I think for our sector, what this means is we are central to the way we get out of lockdown because of the nature of the businesses that we work in. So there is immense focus on us, and there's an opportunity for us to rise to the challenge. But for those of us who are running businesses, pretty much any plan you've got for the year will have gone out the window, and we're having to operate in real time. And I think that's the context we all know we're operating in. Don't worry, everybody's in the same boat, and we hope to help you through this as best we can in what are immensely challenging times. Let's move on.
Okay, good. So in terms of helping you manage the situation, just try and move this slide forward. There we go. Just a quick word on the resources that Steve, you've commissioned and we've delivered over the course of the last week. So let's just quickly run through that. So we've got
yeah, I mean, I pay testament to the team here, Michael, as the slide moves forward, but essentially we're trying to make sure that we're collating and communicating effectively for you what is a rapidly moving situation. We've got good relations with government, but the government itself is changing in its structure and style as it goes on to a war footing. So there's obviously perturbations there. But what we're trying to do is provide clarity where there is it, and a response mechanism from the sector to the powers that be in an effective way. So, Michael, why don't you talk about the three blogs here, 3 bits here that we've worked up?
Yeah, exactly. So first of all, we think about it in terms of the rhythm of what we're doing here. We've got these weekly webinars, which we're doing towards the end of each week. And we're planning to keep those going with those for the foreseeable future, aren't we, Steve? So the timing might change slightly, and more on that a bit later in the presentation. But we're in it for the duration on this, and hopefully you're finding it useful. I'll be interested in your feedback. Second thing we've done is put together very rapidly a microsite which kind of pulls together all of the latest guidance and resources as we see them on COVID-19. Again, if you have a chance to go and have a look, biacovid19.org is where it sits. I'd be really interested in your feedback on what we've got on there. The basic kind of format for it is what we're doing as a sector, and BI is involved in terms of bringing the sector together to deal with the pandemic, how to get involved, to support efforts that are going on, advice and guidance from around the ecosystem, and then more detailed updates on situations around clinical trials and regulations, and some news and resources. So that's what sits on the microsite. Again, please do give us your feedback. And then, Steve, there's a view from the top, our weekly bulletin, which we put out on Monday afternoons generally, authored by you, which just really gives us the absolutely latest news and the priorities as you see them. But you know, we will build on this. So with your feedback, we will expand, we will iterate, and we will enhance this package. So do let us know how you see it working out.
I think that's right. I mean, basically, we're trying to do an email a week, a webinar a week, and the microsite is where it's at in terms of latest information. Just keep it simple.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, let's move on to our next section then. So issues for, sorry, these slides jumping forward slightly too quickly. Issues for our sector and the support available. So I thought, just to get us going on this, Steve, you thought we would get a quick view from the audience in terms of a poll. So the poll here, we're going to launch in a second. Do you want to read it out while I get it lined up?
Yeah, so we're asking, what is your biggest concern about the business impact of COVID-19 for you and your business? Is it supply chain disruption? Is it your own team staffing and how they're operating? Is it operational disruption? Is it a challenge in terms of turnover or revenue reduction, or is it investment and cash flow? So we can only ask 5 buckets on this, so we're having a crack at it. I know that many of you will be disappointed to see many things cancelled, including Eurovision. So this is your chance to make up for that voting anomaly by picking your topic. So please, Michael, if you're ready to roll.
Let's launch that. There we go.
I think, please, we don't get to vote, but you guys do. Please click on one.
Worth saying, Steve, given that we've only got limited options here, if people do have any things that they think are concerns that aren't on this list, again, just fire them into the question box and we'll pick them up afterwards. We're sort of having a bit of a stab here at what we think were the issues based on the feedback we've had to date.
Right, okay, so I think we've done 30 seconds. We've got 76% voted. Last 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good, we've got a response of over 80%. Why don't you close this one and see where we're at? Can you share that?
Yeah, actually a mixed, balanced picture, actually.
Yeah, so interesting this. Operational disruption seems to be coming out top. Investment and cash flow, big issues. So I'm glad we're going to be talking about some of that. Staff absence and welfare 18, turnover revenue reduction 16, and supply chain disruption. I think that's thank you, really useful. Sometimes we've done it on Brexit and we've had sort of 90% in one place. This is a more balanced position, but operational disruption, I think, is obviously clear for everybody. Let's reflect on that as we move forward, if we may, and we'll use this to guide our thinking. Thank you for that. We've got Elliott Forrester with us from F-Start. I mean, Elliott, you're running a business in the centre of our sector during these tumultuous times. What's your take on where we're at and what's been the big things for you?
Yeah, I mean, thanks very much, Steve and Michael and others for giving us the opportunity just to touch base here. I think the poll that you've just run is very reflective of all of the things that we're trying to juggle at the same time in the business. So certainly F-Star is thinking about and is having to deal with each of the elements that you described there. I mean, certainly our core focus in particular over the last week or so, where we've had government moratoria on non-essential work, has been how we manage our staff in that setting. And we have about 80% of our staff now in a position where they're working from home and managing a whole new world of what it's like to work from home and report writing and remote working and figuring out the technology to allow us to continue the business to run in that setting. We've had to, of course, overlay that on other changing circumstances. So, for example, as the schools closed, then how do we support staff who are having to manage a family at the same time as manage a daily work life? And we've actually moved into a semi-shift system in order to figure that out. In parallel to that, of course, we, like many, I'm sure, of the companies on the line, are running clinical trials, and one of our priorities has been to continue to make sure that we can get our drug supply to patients. We run an oncology company, and so we have patients with cancer who are being maintained on the therapies that we provide. They happen to be running in the US, so we have a bit of a remote working situation to tackle there, but we've now solved for that and just basically oversupply drug and stay in contact with the research sites on a daily basis. Equally, we have a vivarium, and so we have ongoing studies from an oncology perspective there. And we, and I'm sure it's also true of many, also have partnerships, and we have partners who we're working on behalf of, and we've had to figure out with them what the priorities are and how we work there. And I guess all of that is in the face of, frankly, many members of our staff wanting to help in other ways. So like, again, many of the companies here, we have access to protein and gene experts, so people who know how to run screens, run PCRs, and I think the BIA's efforts here have been to coordinate and centralize responses to appeals has been terrific, and I think that's important that those who wish to contribute can feel they can to this effort, but that it's a coordinated one. You know, otherwise those who are managing these resources end up just managing the request to help rather than actually managing the help. And so I think a BIA role there has been crucial. Of course, then we go out of the short term into the kind of more medium and long term, and like most companies, although we do have some partner income, you know, we rely on investment, and we're loss making as a company. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out, and again here, the work of Martin and Steve and the team has been central, is to talk to the government about how we support basically loss-making R&D businesses going forwards. I don't know what the average number of months of runway for companies in our sector is, but it won't be years, that's for sure, and it may even be months. And so we need really to think about how the impact in timing in terms of partner income, the impact in timing in terms of future investment will change the nature of our business over the coming few months. And we've been working through that process internally, but also we'll continue to work with the network of other companies in order to convince the government to do something for our sector in a way in which they haven't been able to through the loans guarantee scheme, for example. And then I guess finally, it's really about communication. So we have established strong communication networks internally, and we do weekly all staff Teams meetings, which are useful, and we can continue to communicate as to what's going on with the business, and of course manage the business in a slightly different way. When most people are not face to face, it requires a different sort of management type than the one we would typically adopt in a normal working environment. And of course then beginning to communicate impacts to the board. We were about to dose a new patient study with a new drug, and it's looking right now that even with a 3-month delay, the overall time to that start is 6 months. And so we need to begin to plan for those elements. I know none of these things that we are facing is better, worse, or different from others, and also recognize that a community such as the one around BIA is very important, so that we can share any lessons that we may have learned at this time. So that, I guess, Steve, that's where we are. I don't know whether you wanted me to pick up any other elements or specifics around that, but you know, grateful for the opportunity just to share a few experiences here, and of course happy to answer any questions that may arise.
Thank you, and I'll give Michael the chance to have a look and see if anybody is asking questions specifically for you. But thank you. I mean, I think you know, it's always problem shared is a problem halved, and I think hearing it from you, I'm sure there's many others who are in similar situations. I suppose my thought process is is there anything that we can consider doing which helps? You know, I think our job is to facilitate networks. Obviously, we can be a rapid input into government, and as you say, we've tried to brigade volunteer efforts around things where there's meaningful contribution from our sector, and I'll come to that a bit later. But is there anything you think from a CEO perspective? I don't know if you're doing Zooms with other CEOs, or whether it's that hard thing to do, isn't it? We're an incredibly social sector, and it's very odd with most of the networking going virtual. I don't know if you've thought about this, or whether we should consider some more of this. I mean, a webinar is no replacement for the BIA dinner, but I don't know how you're finding it in a lockdown mode.
Yeah, so I mean, to some extent, we've all had to adapt, and I think the round robin CEO correspondence we've got going on at the moment regarding the potential for, or at least the request for, an early payment of R&D tax credits to the government, recognizing that that's very early in the process. The one that yourself and Martin in particular had facilitated is useful, and as you'll have been able to follow that CEO to CEO correspondence, and as a community is developing there, actually probably ironically in a way in which it hasn't had the opportunity to in the past. And I think as that group evolves, something for you guys to maybe manage more broadly is to continue to add to that list. And I can also envisage the equivalent for chief medical officers or chief scientific or finance officers being useful, as well as over the coming days and weeks, this situation begins to evolve, different pressures will be brought to bear. And I think, again, as you said, a problem shared will throw up solutions, and I think that's a good example of how the convening power of the BIA can be used and create single tracks of communication between each other and in and out of government.
So thank you. We're keen to do that as we evolve. Michael, are there any specific questions for Elliott? Otherwise, I'm keen that we move on and let. So go ahead.
Well, a couple of things come in that I'll just flag. I mean, firstly, just to say, quite a few people commenting, as last week, on the support package, which I'm going to get Martin to comment on in a second. So specifically, what supports are going to be available for very early stage companies, which of course is a lot of our members. So Martin's going to cover that in a second. But just specifically for you, Elliott, a couple of people here mentioning issues around getting shortage of basic materials, PPE, reagents, things like that, and potential impact of a lockdown in the international context in places like India, where we source a lot of API material. Is that having any kind of impact? Is that worrying you at the moment?
It is. In fact, there are one or two areas where we've chosen not to start new work because we were conscious of supply chain issues, and it is basic reagents to some extent. We've actually focused our attention on making sure we've got several drugs on long-term stability, so we've been in close contact with our suppliers there, and they're in turn making great efforts to do their best so that things which have been on stability for 6 months don't fall over, for example. And I think in a prioritized way we can all collectively do that. How we've addressed the supply chain issues that have been spoken of is to look at things and say, where are they on the essential activity hierarchy, and just taken a line and said, right, anything below line X, and we have a list probably of 400 activities. We have a list of a dozen that we're saying, okay, they're absolutely essential today. And from a laboratory perspective, clearly report writing and so on can continue, and recognizing that we may not be the pinch point. It may be that a supplier is a pinch point, and we have to make tough decisions around that, but recognizing that what we don't want to do is to get staff in working one person per lab and then halfway through run out of materials. We do have a stock of material, of course, and I'm sure everyone does, but that's how we've dealt with it, not knowing how long this is going to be. I think if we could all clearly sit down and say this has got 3 weeks in it, it would be easy, but it may not be. And so that's how we've chosen to how we've chosen to tackle it.
And just in terms of your lab operations, I mean, questions here about, how you're managing things actually on site. So are you staggering shifts? Are you letting some people work from home? How's it actually practically working?
Yeah, so the majority of our team, lab-based, we have about 100 lab-based people. The vast majority of that group are now working from home. We've slowly wound down, and in fact, we'll only have 2 or 3 in the UK experiments ongoing, which need to continue in-house, and then probably twice that through contract organizations. Clearly our clinical activity in the US continues, and that needs to continue, but from a lab-based perspective, we've slowly switched people out as those experiments have either been able to be suspended for a long-term basis or have completed, and then reduce the numbers. And how we've been handling that is having a team 1, team 2 type approach, not a hierarchy of 1 versus 2, just 2 different teams, and they work alternately. So in our vivarium, for example, we split that workforce in half and have them work different patterns of work in order to make sure there's a continuity of work, but not an overlap with the same people at the same time. That's how we dealt with that.
Very good. And Steve, just one for you. I mean, this point about kind of global supply chain, Colin Grant's asking, any news or updates that you think might be appearing in terms of China, who may be bringing their manufacturing back on stream. Now, that's something we're going to pick up maybe in the week or 2 ahead, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, from reading trade press, it feels as if some of the China supply feels like it's coming back. Obviously, there's been national restrictions placed in India, which have an impact, and anybody who can fully map the supply chain of everything in this sector is doing better than I am. But I think that and then obviously the other thing that we're seeing is slowing at borders nationally, internationally, and a lot less air freight going around because there's a lot of aeroplanes. So I can't think that there won't be implications for the supply chain. I think one of the things that that everybody recognises up to the top level of government that I engage with and international government discussions like the G20 is the importance of keeping supplies for developments around COVID to happen. So I think there's an understanding of that, but I think we are seeing disruption in the global economy in a way that we've never seen outside of a world war. So this will have implications. I don't think we've got our arms around it yet, but it does feel that China may be coming back as there are significant challenges in Europe, and who knows where we'll be with America in a couple of weeks.
Okay, good. All right, I'm going to move us on. So thank you, Elliott. I'm going to turn now to Martin to pick up these questions that we've had on firstly, what kind of financial support is available and what's our view on it in terms of how useful it is for our sector. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's worth starting saying government is working incredibly hard and quickly on this. We appreciate they've got to look after every sector of the economy, and they're rolling out support as and when they can. So far, the support has focused around government-backed loans, tax deferrals, and covering salaries of those worst affected. We're also expecting support for the self-employed later today. I mean, as has already been mentioned, the main one of interest for our sector is this coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, which is government-backed loans delivered through the high street banks. And the critical thing here is that the applicant business must be a business that those banks would have lent to a few months ago before coronavirus started putting pressure on the business. And of course, that really doesn't cover most biotech companies who are not these banks' usual customers. So what I am saying is do contact those banks if you think you might have a shot at it, and please do contact me to let me know how you're getting on. But sadly, that scheme will probably not support most businesses in our sector. Larger companies have been supported by the Bank of England, and if you are struggling to pay taxes, please do contact HMRC to defer your various payments, and also you can cancel your VAT direct debits immediately. those will provide a little bit of respite, but really, again, I'm not moving the dial. And then you've got support for covering salaries, but these are really employees that are going to be laid off as a result of coronavirus. So it really is a last resort support measure and probably not going to be used massively by our sector. Now, we're in daily conversations with the Treasury. They are asking us for information about how it's impacting the sector. We're speaking to the British Business Bank. We are lobbying hard for a package, as already been mentioned, that will support R&D intensive pre-revenue companies. And I think what we've put in so far on R&D tax credits, so this is asking for R&D tax credit payments for future claims to be paid up in advance, and also for R&D tax credit payments that have been already claimed for but not paid out yet, for those to be expedited. So that request is in with the Treasury. We are continuing to work with them to try and make that happen. We're also working with the BVCA, the British Venture Capital Association, to make sure our concerns are kind of aligned, and we're lobbying with the same effort. But we don't think the R&D tax credit alone is going to be enough. We also need to look at grants, equity and loans. I mean, we are exploring all options, and as Steve said, we're keen to get BIA members' input on both possible solutions and also how it's affecting you and your business. So please do contact me on my email address below at the bottom of the screen there. And finally, on the right hand side, do go to businesssupport.gov.uk, where there is useful information on these schemes. But as I said, we are pushing hard for more biotech specific schemes.
Okay, Martin, thanks. On the just a question coming on the business interruption loan scheme from Mark Stevens, who says he contacted Barclays, but they told him directors must personally guarantee a proportion of the loan. That's your understanding, is it? And do you think that's going to change?
I think it would depend on the assets of that company and how much they're asking for. I don't know, to be honest, how likely Barclays are going to be to change their standard operating procedure. I mean, as I said, they are just basically running this as they would have run their loan book beforehand, but it will be backed by government guarantee. If you could send me more details about that, I'm very happy to have conversations with both Barclays, who I've been in contact with, and also the British Business Bank, which is coordinating the scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes to the point which we know that traditional forms of finance don't tend to work for many of the BIA member companies. Some it will, but some it won't, and therefore, you know, a Treasury program of unprecedented levels, you know, is not focused on this. And I think we've got open lines of communication. My aspiration and my hope is that they'll understand that research intensive business in this space, particularly in human life science, is something that the UK needs to maintain if it's going to have an economy of the future, and therefore making sure that we come out the other side with an effective sector intact, or is going to be a strategic importance to them. The challenge is wiring that desire into a mechanism that works. We think the R&D tax credit route is the most sensible and quickest one. The other way to do it would be, in my view, to do something which enables companies to get going rapidly with something that gives them months worth of finance, so they can get going again if there is an interruption. And could you do that through some sort of innovate scheme? Again, we're thinking creatively at this stage. Nothing is fixed, and you can see that the Treasury is moving at what is lightning speed for them and being very innovative. So who knows? The other thing is, you know, maybe we'll see innovation in a bank. Maybe a bank will actually say, well, actually, okay, they're a rum lot, but if we operated the scheme for this sector, you know, they have got the opportunity to go through, you know, make a real difference to us. So I still hope for change in sentiment amongst the existing banks, and there are some that are closer to our sector than others. But yeah, I think we can see that there's still a job of work to be done here, and none of this is perfect for our sector. But we have to take it in the context that the entire economy is having a heart attack at the same time, and this is going to be tough lines. But this is what we've got, and please keep engaging with us. Martin's doing a great job.
You said there's more comments, Steve, coming in. Just I'll quickly run through some of these, just if you want to comment on it. Let me just run through a list, and then you can pick up the ones you want to comment on. So R&D tax credits, obviously that's a big issue that we're pushing on, but what about Innovate UK and EU grants? Could we push for those to be expedited? You know, trying to get grant payments out to companies more quickly.
Yes, good idea.
You know, emergency funding for businesses who are doing vital work on things like diagnostics. A couple of questions or comments on this. You know, if people are struggling with cash flow to source things like reagents or components, you know, could there be a kind of a rapid scale up of some sort of grant program for that? And then a comment here, which is one for you, I think, perhaps, Martin. So, you know, are these schemes that the government's brought in perhaps not so appropriate for biotech companies, where companies haven't got a product on the market yet, based on kind of UK trading requirements? So loads of comments coming on finances. I'll pause there, see if any of you want to come back on any of those.
So I think if I can comment on, I'm thinking about, is there existing plumbing or wiring in the system that money can be put down fast? And in a sense, that's the tax system, and you can see the government trying to do that. The banking system, they're trying to do that. R&D tax credits is our special bit of the tax system, if you want, for our sector. So we've pushed very hard on that. And then, of course, there's Innovate and UKRI, and they've got various existing plumbing and systems, which are usually in the form of competitions, which could work as well. I think all of those are the mechanisms which we need to operate in. What you don't want is to set up some new mechanism. I think we're going to have to take these ideas and come back to you, because we're not going to get through the webinar if not, but you can see that we're working hard on this, and Martin's your point person on this.
All right, good. Okay, so there's questions coming on the next topic, which is sort of status of workers. So I'm going to hand to Nikki to go through this. It's been a big issue which we've done quite good work on over the last week. So over to you, Nikki.
Thank you. And last week, which in COVID-19 adjusted time is probably about a year ago, there was a very good engagement between industry and the government ahead of the publication last Friday of the categories of key workers. And as a result of that really good working together, we were pleased to see the inclusion of those working as part of the health and social care supply chain, including producers and distributors of medicines, medical and personal protective equipment. Obviously, there then were a lot of questions following on from that about whether or not people who are working in non-COVID related aspects of the life sciences would be counted as key workers. Very helpfully, the Science Minister then wrote to universities and public research institutes to ask them to keep going with their research where possible and sensible. That set out some very helpful extra clarification of what sort of work needed to carry on. So we've followed that up with Minister Zahawi and his office to ask that we can have something similar for life sciences. We're very concerned that the R&D capacity of biotech comes out of this crisis in good order. So we've also had advice to clarify the idea of who's supposed to be in lockdown. Obviously, everyone who can work from home should, but we've also been told that businesses need to keep going where they can. So yesterday, along with the ABHI, BIVDA and the ABPI, we wrote out to all our members to give some guidance on the movement of people into work, and in particular to deal with the issue that some people have already encountered, and I think is going to be more of an issue, that individuals are being challenged about whether they should in fact be going out. So we've provided a suggested template letter that employers can give to their employees that identifies them as people whose work is essential, who would be able to present that to anyone who is challenging their need to travel. We also suggest that members of staff should have photo ID and that this letter should be printed out on the employer's letterhead. So that is all up on the microsite. Do please get in touch if you find you're having any particular difficulties with establishing that your members of staff should be able to travel freely about on their business. And of course, the one proviso is that we're all asked to provide workplaces within which people can safely practice social distancing.
Fantastic. Okay, in the interest of time, Steve, unless you want to come in on that, I think I'm going to move us on.
Just quickly on this, the experience in America with the lockdown is that the biotechnology industry and the pharma industry are exempt from the US lockdown. So you should find that, and these are done at state level in America or even county level. So you should find that, although they'll probably be working differently, US partners are able to continue to function, and we should look to continue to function similarly. We're hearing reports that the Indian lockdown is having a big impact on attendance at work in India. So we're seeing differential impacts in different parts of the globe. And we hope people will take a sensible course through this. And this is a supportive way of helping that. And I think Elliott talked to the practicalities of this in a way that I'm hearing from many other companies as well. Most people from home, the people who need to be in and working in different shifts.
Okay, good stuff. All right, Steve, you're going to talk to this one as well. We've seen quite a lot of movement actually from UK authorities to support efforts so far as well, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, we're a regulated sector, and you know, we're used to having a number of rules that we operate within. And again, these rules are changing, or the operators of the rules are at least changing their focus and their capacity. So the MHRA have focused very rapidly on work on COVID-19. So if you're doing that work, I think the MHRA are a very vital and important partner. But that also means they've deprioritised lots of other things. So again, you know, war footing has an impact there. The biggest one, I think, for us is the stuff from the clinical trial community and the Health Research Authority, and what's going on there, which is obviously that there's been a significant change in the prioritisation of the capacity of the NHS to work on clinical trials, and I think that has widespread implications for our sector that Elliott talked to. And the other one, of course, is the Competition and Markets Authority. I think we're looking to bring people together in novel and interesting ways to sort out the solution for this crisis. And I think it's great that the Competition and Markets Authority have given new approaches to business cooperation, which in some senses is to do with food supply, but also effectively covers the work that we're looking to do to bring together people in task forces. So competition law is in a different place, medicines regulation is in a different place, and clinical trials are in a different place.
Good stuff. Okay, we've been looking across the patch and had a lot of suggestions coming in from our members about places where people can go to for kind of broader advice on how to manage the crisis. Sorry, I skipped on one too many there. So just thought we'd do a quick roundup of some of the things that we've seen and that we're pointing people towards on our microsite. So I suppose three kind of categories here. You've got stuff coming in from the legal firms, looking at the contractual implications, the kind of the legal aspects of kind of how we're going to manage the risks from a kind of a business legal perspective. Then we've got kind of consultancies and business organizations providing more business-focused advice on things like supply chain management. We talked a bit about that earlier. CBI in particular, really great resource bank and Q&A up. That's a snapshot from a screenshot from KPMG's continuity planning resource, which is really good. And then on the right-hand side, we've seen kind of more kind of workplace management style advice coming in. So there's one there from McKinsey on advice on how to get your employees working effectively from home. It's a really good read. I'd recommend that. ACAS have got advice on how to manage and support employees. Chartered Institute of Personal Development have got also an employee guide in there as well, focusing on all the HR issues. So there's loads of this stuff. What I'd say is go to our microsite. I'm trying to flag as much of this on there as possible. And if you've got suggestions of things that you've read that you think other people on this webinar or in our community would really benefit from having a look at, do please drop me an email about it. My contact details are at the end of this webinar later on. Okay, moving on. Time for another poll, I think, Steve.
Yeah.
So do you want to read it out while I get it lined up?
Yeah, so we're looking at what should we be focusing on. On which of the following would additional advice on responding to COVID be most useful? So we sort of got the buckets as sort of HR and staffing issues. We've got tax or financing, business continuity and risk management, commercial and contracts, and we're giving you an other box here as well, which you can drop us into the question box if you've got a different thing. Really helping us to structure if we were to do future webinars or more, or seek support for various types. I'm keen to know sort of where you're at. So HR and staff, tax and finance, business continuity risk, commercial contracts or others. We're running for 20 seconds. I'm going to run this one faster so that because we're close to time. So last 5 seconds, 60% of you have voted. So 4, 3, 2, 1. And do you want to take it off, Michael? I think we've got 75% voted, so that's good.
There we go. Do you want to read out the results?
Winning in purple, business continuity and risk management. Close in second and third, HR and staff and tax and finance, and a little bit on commercial and contracts and a little bit of other. So if you've got other, please tell us what they are. But thank you, that's very useful for us as we think through what we do next. So business continuity, I think, Michael, is where we should investigate. And if people have got good ideas as to what you want to share or how we could think about that, that would be most useful. Let's keep going.
Okay, brilliant. All right, let's just try and move this on. Okay, so a lot of work going on across the sector. We're going to have to dance through this at rapid speed, Steve, but I know you can do it. So
yeah.
Can you move the slides forward, or do you want me to do that?
Let's see, I will go in and see if I can drive. So, need to go back one. Sorry, can you take me back a couple?
Yeah, of course.
So this is the bit of the webinar where I'll sort of update on what we're doing as a sector to support on COVID-19. And as you can see in the last week, lots is going on in the UK sector. The Synergen trial started last week. Lots of people are working on helping the coronavirus testing centre open in Milton Keynes. We've seen vaccine trials get research investment last Friday, and lots of people are working on rapid test and antibody testing, innovative ideas. So lots going on. Well, I'm also starting to see this week the emergence of other forms of coordination, either at global level or internationally. We've seen that the pharma companies are getting together. Bio in the US held a webinar this week, and I'm trying to link us into other forms of coordination where we see it. So lots happening. And that means there's also new resources like the one here on the left from Milken, which shows the shape of the treatments and vaccines in the research pipeline. Many of you joined a webinar that we had with CEPI at the beginning of the week, looking at manufacturing support for novel vaccines. And it's interesting to see the ICMRA come together with new advice on global advice about thinking about how we might do research and clinical trial work in COVID-19 in a community. So it's interesting to see lots of this coming together at the moment.
Link to that Milken stuff on our website as well, Steve, yeah?
Yeah, brilliant. So that's another resource. We're seeing quite a lot of resources of people who are putting together what's going on in COVID-19 emerging, and we're putting them into various buckets. So these are just a couple of updates on the work streams, which those of you who are aware of last week we talked in more detail on. Lots of work is going on. I'm not going to go into these in great detail, but the antibody work stream is working really well, looking to develop viral neutralizing antibodies and protective antibodies as therapeutics. Jane Osborne is in charge of this with great leadership with the pools, and there you can see that the team is coming together there, looking for coming together a great community that I think is really working well. You can see that they are looking at needing antibody sequences which are potential neutralizers, and if you've got any sequences that you can share, the team are up for this. Eric is our point person for this at the moment, and we will give a fuller update on this on a webinar next week. My plan next week is to go back to what's the sector doing for the COVID response, and we'll go through in detail where these groups have moved to. So you can see the antibody group have moved rapidly in the last week. The vaccine manufacturing task force is the other one that Ian McCubbin talked to at the webinar last week. This too is moving at pace. there is a decent structure and large portion of BIA membership engaged. I've just listed the leadership here. Part of what was worked up with this was announced as having been supported by government money on the vaccines manufacture announcement earlier in the week. And there's been a very good discussion, very positive discussion with Patrick Vallance and this group this week. And again, more details on this in the webinar next week. But this has really been welcomed by Patrick, and it's fantastic to see so many people engaged and involved. So thank you if you're involved, and if you're not involved and you think you can add something to this, it really is motoring at pace, this particular group. The other thing that I think is happening in real time this week is the national effort to scale up UK testing capacity. And I thought it might be useful for people to have an understanding as to where I think this is at. Chris Malloy, who's the CEO of the Medicines Discovery Catapult, is heading an operation to scale COVID diagnostic testing across the UK. That's being nationalised in centralised hubs to allow for maximum efficiency with consumable supply chain, and the NHS geared up to support that structure. Both they've got to get stuff into that testing capacity and then out from it, and that's why they're thinking about doing this in a coordinated and nationalised, a national centralised way. The BIA is supporting calls from that group, which is supporting Chris's drive to build that commercial supply of antigen testing kit consumables. People are being asked to lend certain types of PCR machines and instruments. You've been contacted already if that's you, and there's likely to be a call for staff loans or volunteers to run tests in those hubs, which is being organised as we speak. So that's where the BIA is fitting into and supporting the national effort that Chris is in charge of at the moment. There's also obviously lots of talk at the moment about the antibody tests, sometimes called the game change tests, to show if you've developed antibodies. I'm aware that the Department of Health and Social Care placed an order for 3.5 million of those tests on Tuesday. Public Health England is evaluating tests. There's nothing that I'm aware of that's validated or ready for mass rollout. And if you've seen what Chris Whitty said at the press conference yesterday, I think that's where I'm taking my information from. But we're also being involved with much innovation. Many people have come to us and with lots of ideas and novel thinking in this space. We're signposting that to Public Health in England, but I think they're probably under the cosh. We're not getting much clear signal back to the sector yet from this, and I wouldn't expect to see it in the coming days, but we'll look to give you an update on this again next week.
Okay, good stuff, Steve. Just next section's on getting involved. Just really a recap of what the opportunities are for people to get involved. But just to kick that off, we thought we'd just do a quick, see if I can take it forward, a quick poll on this. Again, I think we're doing this quite well as a double act. Do you want to go through the question? And
yeah, so we're asking if you're looking to support, and we've had a real lots of people coming forward. Which areas do you think you can help in? Is it the vaccine manufacture piece that we talked about last week, the antibody task force, which again Jane Osborne talked about last week, and you've heard me talk very quickly about there. Testing capacity, lots of people have volunteered and have some capacity or innovation or thoughts in terms of COVID-19 testing. And then the other thing is in a sense, trained people, staff volunteers, or not sure at this stage. So which area do you think your organisation has the potential to support for? And this would give us a flavour as to where our community believes it has capacity. Is it vaccine manufacture? Is it antibodies? Is it testing? Is it staff volunteers that could work on any or all of these, or perhaps broader things? Or actually we're pretty busy, or we're not sure we should do, we're going to stay at home. So thank you very much. Do get polling. I think it's up and running, Michael. Yeah, people are voting away. I'm conscious we've got 5 minutes till the top of the hour and I want to get this done and dusted. So I'm going to stop us in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
There we go.
Not sure, need a bit more is obviously important. You think many people think they have staff volunteers. Some people think they can help with their vaccine manufacture, fewer in antibody task force. Thank you, that's helpful for us to know.
Okay, good stuff. All right, then we're on the home straight. So here are the contact points for getting in touch if you do want to get involved in any of this stuff. So the government contact points on the left. All of these details, just in the interest of time, are up on the microsite. But suffice to say, the government, I mean, what do you think about how the government's doing in terms of sort of managing all of these suggestions and proposals from industry, Steve?
I think it's a challenge for government. I think that there are, as you can see here, by the fact that there are different bits of government that are being suggested as the signposts in that this is a huge challenge for the capacity for government to organise. I think that's why we're trying to come up with some self-organised structures that we can nucleate easily, and that's been welcomed by Patrick Vallance. But again, I think there is no clear natural wiring, and lots of this is being built real time. So I share your frustrations in terms of finding decision makers on many of these points, but these are the formal structures we've been asked to share.
Okay, well, I'd like to think we're getting pretty coherent in terms of what we're doing. Do you want to run through kind of what we're doing to increase engagement, what our asks are of the people or opportunities that we're putting forward?
Yep, so hopefully newscast, our weekly bulletin on a Monday, sign up and share that. Sign up either through the BIA's website, or if you've got it directly, share it with colleagues and encourage them to respond, and we can sign people up if they want to get that as a regular thing. I hope our webinars are useful, and we'll run some more virtual events. We're thinking for next week probably around doing something which we had pre-existing about how do you work with China in the post-COVID era, but that's likely to be Thursday. And then I think we'll go for one on Friday, which is likely to be what's the sector doing to support the COVID effort, and we'll update on manufacturing, we'll update on antibodies, we'll update on testing, and we'll see what else people want to do. If you've got other ideas, webinars or formats that would work, please tell us. We'd love to know what you think of the microsite which we put up, and you know, it's only useful if it's a resource for you. And then if you've got anything you think that needs to be shared with more broadly, please come to us. So these are our contact points, Michael or the events team, as to how you found them useful or not.
Yeah, just to reiterate that point you made there, because it hasn't appeared on the slide. It's for next week, Steve. So we're talking about a China special on Thursday, aren't we? And then this regular COVID-19 update on the Friday. So look out for our events page where details of how to sign up for those will appear in the next day or two. Okay, good. Finally, Steve, you wanted to just make a few points about kind of just picking up some of the interest.
I mean, some people may be new to the BIA and think, what is this organisation? Some of you will know us well. If you'd like to know more about the organisation, Michael McGivern is able to tell you. We do stuff in normal times as well as extraordinary times, and we're a fantastic community to engage with. Michael would love to hear from you, and if you've joined, we may follow up, and if we don't know you, ping you a note to say hi and understand how you got to find out about this, so we can understand if there's things we can do to help you.
Okay, good stuff. Well, 1 minute to 12. Do you want to take a couple of questions, or should we leave it there? I mean, we've been through a few already.
One to close, and then we'll shut it down.
Oh, that's putting a lot of pressure on me, Steve, to choose the right one. Let's see. Well, I think what I'm going to do, Steve, is just say that I've been amazed by how many people on these questions box have actually put forward really useful suggestions, actually, things that they are encouraging us to share with other people on the call, suggestions for future webinars. So I think I'm just going to close it by saying thanks for all of your suggestions. We're going to go through these offline in quite a lot of detail, and we'll get back to you, and we'll build some of these suggestions into webinars over the course of the next few weeks. So thanks to quite a few people saying thank you as well. So thank you for saying thank you. Steve, final word to you.
Well, thanks everybody. Extraordinary times. Appreciate your engagement, and hope this is of use. Really keep going. We're an important sector for getting us out the other side of this. So thank you for all your hard work. We'll keep working on your behalf, and let's get through this all together.
Okay, Steve.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Elliot. Thanks, Martin. Thanks,
Martin.
Speak to you all next week.